In a high-end Manhattan restaurant, the soft melodies of jazz mingled with the clink of crystal glasses and hushed conversations. It was a place where time seemed to pause, menus had no prices, and laughter was wrapped in power and poise. In the corner, behind velvet drapes, sat Daniel Cross, billionaire, media mogul, and the shining emblem of American capitalism. Everyone in the city knew his name. Most of Wall Street revered him. But few knew the man behind the billions. And what even fewer knew was that Daniel hadn't slept peacefully in years, exhausted by a hollowness that wealth could not fill. Tonight, he wasn't dining for pleasure but for business. With him sat 3 international executives, each vying for his approval for the next big investment. Daniel leaned back in his chair, twirling his wine glass between 2 fingers, eyes half-lidded with boredom. He was a master of the game, but even victories had lost their flavor. Then she came. Unwittingly, the woman who would change his life. "Good evening. My name is Alina. I'll be your waitress tonight," the young woman said, her voice warm and confident. There was serenity in her gaze, but also a depth that spoke volumes beyond her apron. She didn't just speak, her presence commanded silence without trying. Daniel didn't look up. "Fine. Bring me a Chateau Margaux 2005 and make sure the steak is rarer than my patience." Laughter erupted at the table. Alina showed no expression. But what no one saw was the brief glance she cast at Daniel's trembling hand, the way his fingers hesitated slightly as he raised the glass. She noticed everything, and never forgot. An hour into dinner, the executives started chatting in French, discussing market trends. To assert a bit of his intellect, or maybe to intimidate, Daniel chimed in with a phrase. He mispronounced it. Alina, walking by with a tray, seamlessly translated the entire conversation, even correcting one of the executive's data points. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You speak French?" Alina nodded. "And Italian, Russian, and Spanish." "Impressive, for a waitress," Daniel said sarcastically. Then, raising his voice loud enough for nearby tables to hear, he added, "Translate this, my watch costs more than your annual salary." A hush fell over the restaurant. Heads turned. The air tightened with suspense. Alina stood still for a moment, then smiled softly. "My salary is yours," she said clearly, locking eyes with him. A ripple of surprise swept through the restaurant. Daniel stared, the arrogance slowly fading from his face. "What did you say?" "I said, my salary is yours," Alina repeated. "Not literally. But it used to be." The table fell silent. Even the jazz band stopped playing. One of the executives discreetly checked his phone, people were already tweeting. Alina continued, her voice steady. 3 years ago, I worked for your company. Marketing department. I made 6 figures and burned out before 30. I walked away from a salary people dream of. Left the sleeping pills behind. Swapped meetings for sunlight. I chose the job that let me breathe again. She gently placed the wine on the table. I serve people now. And I see them, not their suits, not their wallets. Their hearts. The executives exchanged uneasy glances. Daniel said nothing. But something cracked inside him, a memory of his younger self, full of dreams, now buried under wealth and deals. That night, the story went viral. A patron had filmed the moment. Within hours, millions had watched as a billionaire was humbled by a former employee turned waitress. But that wasn't the end of the story. What the world didn't see was Daniel, in his penthouse, staring out at the city lights, questioning everything. Silence had turned into a scream. A week later, Daniel returned to the restaurant. Alone. Wearing a hoodie. No assistants. No car waiting outside. He asked for Alina. When she came to the table, he stood. "I owe you an apology," he said. "No," she replied. "You owe yourself one." He smiled faintly. You were right. I haven't seen people in years. Just numbers. Markets. Assets. Somewhere along the way, I forgot who I was doing it all for. They talked for hours, about burnout, identity, the emptiness of purposeless ambition. Alina shared stories of the customers she'd helped, the lives that had changed from a single act of kindness. Daniel listened, truly listened, for the first time in decades. And he cried, quietly, without shame. Daniel left that night with something he hadn't felt in years, clarity. But he also left with a mission. He disappeared from the public eye for 6 months. Rumors swirled, was he sick? Retired? But behind the scenes, Daniel was building something new. Months passed. Alina continued to serve with quiet grace. Then one day, an envelope arrived for her. No name. No return address. Inside was a letter. You reminded me of who I am. And who I want to be. I've started the Alina Foundation, to help people who've left toxic jobs in search of healing. Full scholarships, mental health resources, grants for passion-driven projects. You are my inspiration. Thank you. With it was a check. $1 million. Alina wept. But she didn't quit. She stayed at the restaurant, not out of necessity, but purpose. She mentored struggling coworkers. Helped a young busboy earn his GED. Secretly donated to customers she overheard in distress. One day, she found a single mother crying in the restroom. Without a word, she paid her rent. No one ever found out who did it. And whenever someone asked why a woman like her still waited tables, she smiled and said, because this is where people remember how to be human. Daniel eventually returned. This time, not as a tycoon, but as a partner. Together, they opened community cafes across the country, staffed by those society had cast aside. Ex-cons, refugees. Single mothers. Veterans. Every location had its own story. And every cup of coffee changed a life. The story of the billionaire and the waitress became a modern parable. Not for drama or twists, but for the truth. That wealth without humanity is hollow. That status without empathy is meaningless. And that sometimes, the richest hearts aren't found in boardrooms, but behind serving trays. In a world obsessed with heights, Alina chose depth. And in doing so, she didn't just change a man, she started a movement.